When the Cranstons decided to adopt a little puppy, they never anticipated the bond it would grow to have with their baby son. And when their 3-month-old fell asleep one day, they were astonished to see what the puppy did. If someone had told Mr. and Mrs. Cranston that they would be witnessing the cutest scene of their lives only 3 months after the birth of their baby, they would have completely believed them. After all, they were firmly convinced that there was nothing cuter in the world than the boy they had just been blessed with. But if that same someone had told them that little Ryan wouldn't be alone or with either of them in this scene, they would have turned up their noses. There was no chance in hell that they were going to leave their newborn son alone with somebody else so soon, or wasn't? Still, nobody told them anything, and the hospital staff discharged the happy little family with a simple smile. As they made their way back home, they thought their day couldn't be better, but fate had a surprise in store for them. Driving down the quiet suburban road, Mrs. Cranston suddenly spotted something unusual ahead, a small figure lying in the middle of the street. At first, Mr. Cranston couldn't see anything. Thinking she was slightly delirious from all the medication, he carried on driving, but she was insistent about what she saw. So he turned the car around to check again, and sure enough, in the middle of the road was a tiny little body shivering severely from the cold. Mr. Cranston slowed down the car and hopped out to investigate further. After all, it wasn't every day you just came across a puppy in the middle of the road. There must have been something wrong with it, that much he knew, and as he got closer, he could see the extent of the poor puppy's health. Without a second thought, he scooped her up and rushed her into the warmth of their car. His wife was touched to see that her husband had been so kind as to bring the puppy with him. Her heart broke when she saw how skinny the poor thing was. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. It must have been abandoned by its mother and left to fend for itself. But being so small in such a big, scary city, the poor puppy didn't stand a chance. That is, unless Mr. and Mrs. Cranston gave it a home. So without much delay, they raced home with their newborn and new puppy. They had a lot to discuss and figure out. That much was clear enough. Once home and settled, they started to talk about the immediate future. As much as Mrs. Cranston was supportive of helping the puppy, she was extremely apprehensive about keeping it. Having a new baby was scary and time-consuming enough. She simply couldn't imagine caring for a baby and a puppy at the same time. But Mr. Cranston was already in love with the little pup. She was so sweet and seemed delighted to rest in his strong arms. He swore that keeping her would be good for them and their little one. He sold Mrs. Cranston the beautiful image of the two of them playing together when they were both older and being each other's best friends forever. Whether it was the hormones or the genuine love of the idea, Mrs. Cranston caved and said that they could keep the puppy. But there was one thing they needed to do first: have her checked out by a vet. On the way to the clinic, they decided to name the sweet thing Say. It was a soft, sweet name for something just as pure and lovely. They found themselves hoping for her to make a full recovery and started dreaming of the little things they would buy for her to make her stay at their house more pleasant. Little Cy was undernourished and severely thin, indicating she had been fending for herself for some time. Luckily, they had found her just at the right time. The veterinary clinic that took her informed the Cranstons the next day with a great update. Say had reacted well to treatment and was going to be just fine. They told them that if she hadn't been found when she was, the outcome would have been very different. Mrs. Cranston couldn't help but feel that there was a thread of destiny here, one that had dictated that they find sweet Cy when they did. There was only one problem now: she was still too small and sick to be formally adopted. Since she had been found as a stray, she would have to stay with a licensed foster family until she was healthy enough to follow them home. According to the vet, this would require about 4 weeks, and a lot could happen in 4 weeks. What if the foster family decided to adopt her first, or if they made arrangements with other families? But the Cranstons were dead set on adopting little Cy, so they came up with a plan. They told the vet that if, after 1 month, no one had taken her, they would come back for her and formally adopt her. That first month sped by unbelievably fast, and soon enough, they were calling the clinic to find out if C was still there. They were torn because they wished she had already found a loving family, but at the same time, they knew this meant they wouldn't get the chance to bring her home. But sure enough, C was still there. The clinic said a few families had been interested, but it had fallen through time and time again. It was as if she was waiting for the Cranstons. So they packed up their baby and went to the clinic to bring C home. When they laid eyes on her after a month, they could hardly believe it was the same dog. She looked so much better. She had some good meat on her bones now, her coat glistened in the light, and she had far more energy. When she heard Mrs. Cranston's voice, she immediately perked up with joy. Somehow, she remembered them and was very pleased to hear them. They packed up the happy pup into her carrier and took her home with them. C yapped with happiness all the way home, and they felt like their family was finally complete. But even through the excitement and joy, the Cranstons had to remind themselves that it wasn't going to be a breeze having a newborn and a puppy. In actual fact, they had just made their lives substantially more difficult. The Cranstons were now juggling the demands of caring for both a newborn baby and a rescued puppy. It was an overwhelming responsibility, but their compassion and love fueled their determination. They took turns making sure C felt loved and taken care of, and in turn, the puppy showed them how sweet and calm she could be. As long as she could lie in the same room they were in, she felt happy. Funnily enough, her favorite place to sleep was under Mr. Cranston's feet or in his empty slipper. Over time, with dedicated care and attention, C gradually regained her strength. It was heartwarming to witness her transformation from a fragile, malnourished pup to a lively and spirited companion. She had come back from the clinic acting quite docile and frail, still a little scared of whatever she had faced before they had found her. But now she was a completely different dog, and her joy knew no bounds. Despite the challenges of sleepless nights and round-the-clock care, the Cranstons found immense fulfillment in nurturing both Ryan and C. They dreamed about a day in the future when all their hard work would pay off. They would often talk about how they envisioned the two of them playing together in the garden in the warm summer evenings. However, amidst the joy, a hint of worry lingered. They were excited about the idea of Ryan having a furry friend, yet they hesitated to leave the two together unsupervised just yet, unsure of how the puppy might behave around the newborn. They remained cautious. The videos and horrifying stories they had read about babies left alone with dogs just put the fear of God into them. They were really worried that if they encouraged a relationship between C and Ryan at this point in time, they might end up with a mauled child in the future. They shivered at the mere thought of something so horrendous happening to their dear boy, but their friends told them not to worry and explained how their once single dogs had become loving siblings to their babies. But the Cranstons were afraid this only happened if the dog had been inside the house before the baby. In their case, they had just gotten the puppy. It was actually in the same phase of its life as their baby. This just seemed a bit risky, with far too much to lose. Of course, they let Ryan watch C as she played. Even at the young age of 3 months, Ryan was in absolute awe of the little dog. He would often squeal in delight when the puppy came into sight or sat by his dad. As for C, she was just as intrigued about the baby as he was of her, but of course, far more mobile. This meant that she could explore her brother's surroundings a little better than he could. Cautious of letting her too close, the Cranstons resorted to just letting C sniff at Ryan's toys. Her curiosity was very strong. They could see that she desperately wanted to play with him. They knew that the two would have great fun with one another, but they just couldn't shake the nerves they felt about it all. Sometimes, though, things have a strange way of turning out, and fate had another surprise in store for them. One day, while Ryan was peacefully napping on his play mat on the floor, Mrs. Cranston walked out of the room for a second to go to the bathroom. Since her son was just 3 months old, she could trust that he would be there when she came back. She had been gone for a few minutes when the hair on the back of her neck went right up. She got a worrisome feeling that something wasn't right, so she ran back into the room, prepared to see the worst. But it wasn't Ryan that gave her a fright when she came back. Somehow, Sai had gotten out of her crate in the adjacent room and was now hovering over the little slumbering Ryan. Mrs. Cranston stopped herself in her tracks. Everything inside of her told her to run and grab her son off the floor, but she stopped herself. She was a little curious to see what would unfold. She quietly called for her husband to join her, and both of them watched in anticipation. Sei was completely unaware of them. However, she seemed concerned for her little brother's well-being. She sniffed a little at his head and tried to nudge him, but she wasn't strong enough. The Cranstons watched on with bated breath. What was she going to do? Was Ryan going to wake up? Should they step in? Mr. Cranston was ready to intervene if Sei did anything untoward, but what happened next melted their hearts. As if understanding Ryan's fragility, little Sai decided that she needed to give him some love and affection, so she gently laid her head atop his and closed her eyes. Within moments, both were fast asleep. The sight melted the Cranstons' hearts. The innocence and care exhibited by the 3-month-old puppy towards the newborn were beyond words. This was unlike anything they had expected. Their fears and anxieties instantly dissolved. They couldn't help but laugh at how concerned they had been prior to this day. Watching the scene unfold now made their fears almost laughable. They finally began to understand what their friends had been talking about all along. Mr. Cranston couldn't resist capturing this precious moment. He took out his phone and recorded the serene scene, capturing the essence of gentle and unconditional love between the two. Overwhelmed by the sheer beauty of the moment, he decided to share the video online, wanting the world to witness the pure and tender bond between Sei and Ryan. He did this with the sole intention of spreading joy, but he also hoped that he could advocate for rescue animals and encourage people to consider adopting instead of buying. Maybe if people saw just how cute and sweet a rescue puppy could be, they wouldn't hesitate when looking at their options. The video garnered attention and spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Messages of admiration poured in, celebrating the heartwarming connection between the rescued puppy and the newborn baby. Many were inspired by the Cranston story, moved by the compassion and love that transpired between the sweet pair. As the video went viral, it became a beacon of hope and compassion. Mr. Cranston used this platform to raise awareness about the importance of pet adoption and the immense love and companionship rescued animals could offer. His advocacy efforts led to increased support for animal shelters and rescue organizations, bringing forth positive changes in the lives of countless animals. Like See Her Story garnered even more attention when people heard the full account of how the family had come across Sai in the first place. Many locals began to ask where Sei had received treatment. When they divulged the place and the name of the vet, they never thought they would get the reaction they received. Donations of all kinds began to pour in from all corners of the country. Fellow adopters of animals donated to the clinic, thanking the vets for their care for Sei and other animals alike. Inspired by their donations, the Cranstons then created a nonprofit organization to process and donate all the proceeds to the animal shelter that Sai had originally been destined for. They were hopeful that through an annual run and exposure to the animals in the shelter, people would begin to realize and see the impact this institution was making in their community. People from far and wide agreed that it was, in fact, destiny that had brought them together like that. Some even went so far as to say that Sai and Ryan were kindred spirits from another life. Regardless of the belief, one thing was for sure: Ryan was about to grow up with a friend for life. What a beautiful story of fate and companionship. Would you have stopped for the little puppy? How do you feel about people letting their animals get close to their young children? What would your best piece of advice be to this young couple? And thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more.